Oh, man. That's amazing. Some of you are like, I'm going to serving kids now, just so I don't you don't have to listen to me, and you can just watch videos, right? And so I want to say that I'm so thankful for our city kids, city builders, volunteers, and what they do. And I want to encourage you, like maybe even today, and as we've been in this series called Risk the Ocean, maybe the way that you risk today is that you would step into maybe an unfamiliar environment of investing in the lives of elementary kids or preschoolers, or if you're just like, man, I just like to hold babies, we need that as well. And so, and if you say, I'm not good at childcare, we don't need babysitters. We need people who will jump around with kids. We need guys who are not wrestle with the boys, but jump around and have fun with them, and also just invest in their lives. And so I just encourage you, at the end of today, if that's you, come find me, come track me down, come track Brittany down, or whatever, and we'd love to help you out with that. So what our elementary kids are talking about is trust for the next 5 weeks. What would it look like to trust? And really, what makes God trustworthy? And I think if you kind of talk about the series we've been in, Risk the Ocean, or we've been talking about what Solomon writes in Ecclesiastes, where he says, cast your bread upon the water, and it will return to you. And so it's just this idea, and you say, why are we feeding ducks? We're not feeding ducks, but what Solomon was talking about was if you send a ship out to the ocean with grain on it, a lot of times in the trade industry, you would send something out, and then it would arrive, and then they would send something back. And it's this whole idea that if you risk, then there could possibly be, you open yourself up to reward. And so in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of this idea of risking the ocean, are so many things. There's sharks, there's whales, there's pirates, there's the Kraken. There's so many things in the middle of the ocean, but one of the things in the middle of the ocean, if I would say risking the ocean for us, would be one verse. Actually, it's 2 verses. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. If we want to talk about what's in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of our risk, it's trust. And what I've learned in my life is that there's so many things that are opposite of trust. And so if we don't risk the ocean, why is it that we won't? Why is it that we will not send things out proclaiming that we trust God to do what he says he will do, and he is who he says he is? And we could say a lot of different things, but what I've learned a lot is the opposite of trust is actually suspicion. It's questioning whether or not God is who he says he is. It's questioning whether or not people are who they say they are. When we don't trust, it's because there's suspicion. We think that something else is up or something else is fishy. And what I've learned is where there is trust and suspicion, one or the other usually finds itself when there is distance in a relationship, where there's lack of communication. In lack of communication, we fill that void, that ocean, with either trust or suspicion. That could be anything from you send your husband with a grocery list, and he comes back and he forgot the milk. But you don't talk about it, right? And so now what happens is, in your mind, your head starts creating a narrative of why that happened. Well, it's because he doesn't love me. He was too focused on the Oreos. How can he not get Oreos without the milk? He must not love me. He doesn't listen. He's filling his mind with other things. And so when there is a lack of communication, we start creating a new story in our minds. And here's what's crazy about our brains, is there's a chemical in our brain that actually rewards us when we create a narrative. So whenever, and it could be completely false, it could be completely wrong, but when we tell ourselves a story, it makes us feel better because at least we feel like we know this is what happened, when actually your husband's just a dude and he forgot the milk. That's never happened in my life, but I'm just saying, in some of our lives. But we like to fill that gap and that space when there is no communication or there is a distance in relationship with something. And we will always fill it with either trust or suspicion. And so this morning, since it's Family Sunday, I wanted to kind of speak to a specific group of people, but I think it applies to all of us. Because I don't know, when you talk about space and distance and waiting, I don't know if there is a greater task that characterizes the idea of waiting and sometimes silence and distance as it is to be a parent. I don't know if there's a greater call where we find more waiting, because parenting is inescapably the work of waiting. And just like the ocean, so much of what you and I do as parents is the investment is unseen. It's waiting work, it's risky work. As a parent, especially to you, especially to those of us with small kids, but even older kids, we constantly devote our time and energy into something that doesn't produce immediate results. It's unclear at 100 different turns whether what you're doing will have any lasting effect on your kids, which is tough because lasting effect is what we're really after. So we look at our kids, and I think my wife and I, maybe like once a week, we kind of, after we tuck the kids in bed, we just ask the question, are we just ruining our kids? I don't know if you've ever been there, but you start asking this because there's this space and there is this waiting where we're investing in our kids, we're loving our kids, we're trying our best to direct them in the right path, hoping that something lands, that something stays, that something sinks in, that it will produce the kind of man or woman that we think they should be. But in the middle of all that is just a ton of waiting and a ton of distance. And because of that, there are times as parents when we fill that void and that space of raising our kids with either trusting in God or suspicion that God's not who He says He is and He's not going to actually be faithful. And here's how I know that we do that. Because when there is suspicion in any situation, we hold as tightly as possible to whatever that thing is. So for so many of us, we're so terrified that something's going to happen to our kids or they're not going to turn out the way we want them to. So we have the death grip on our kids. We don't want them to do it so we wrap them up in bubble wrap whenever they go out and we do all these things because we're so terrified what could happen at some point. And so there's this guy in the Bible, and this isn't necessarily about parenting, but in Psalm 143, I want to encourage you to turn there just real quick. Psalm 143, it's going to be on the screen as well. You can look it up on your phone, but Psalm 143, he says this, "For the enemy has pursued my soul. He has crushed my life to the ground. He has made me sit in darkness like those long dead," which is super dark and morbid. Happy Family Sunday. But here's what David's talking about. He's in a really rough spot, and so in this waiting, in this time of distance and silence, he just feels like he's sitting in darkness and almost to the point where he's not even alive because he feels like there's nothing happening, there's nothing moving. And for some of us, that's the way we feel with our relationship with God. Like nothing's happening, nothing's moving. They're still making the same mistakes they were making 3 months ago. They're still doing the same thing that they were. Is anything helping? Is anything moving? And what I love is David's progression in this. Verse 8, he says this. Because of where he is, he asks God, he says, "Let me hear in the morning of your steadfast love, for in you I trust." So he says, God, would you help me to hear first and foremost? I would say the one thing that I do the worst job of is hearing as a parent. I do a lot of talking. I do a lot of reaction. There's very few times I step back from a situation and I think, just being real, I ask God, what should I do in this circumstance? I actually look and I say, well, this is what you did, and in my mind, this is the best possible result, this is the best possible discipline or whatever else, this is what we're going to do, and I talk. And what David says is, in this moment of waiting, in this season of, for you, parenting or whatever else, we so often want to take control. Ooh, that's loud, that's here. Hey, Leslie, you're here. Jumped a little bit. Spirits in the room this morning. All right, so... But if we were just honest, there are very few moments when we actually hear before we talk, before we speak. I think so many of us that are in this uncertain time in our lives, we just try to grasp and hold on to everything. And when we hold on to everything, we try to control everything. So we do a lot of talking and less listening. And what David says is, in this season of waiting, in this season of silence, God, I'm going to stop talking, and would you just let me hear? And he doesn't just say, let me hear. He says, in the morning. So the first thing that David does or wants to do is, when I wake up, I just want to listen. I think we see as parents, we wake up, the alarm clock goes off, and I either hear my kids getting up and getting dressed, or I'm going to wake them up, and I just kind of jump into my day. And when I jump into my day, what I've learned is I do a lot of reactive work. I do a lot of reaction. There's not a lot of proactive in that. It's hard for me. It's a struggle for me. Something I have to fight for, to wake up in the morning and listen before I speak. And not to my spouse and not to my kids, but to God. And most of the time I realize it's because I'm trying to control too much. or I've let my schedule control me, and I've pressed snooze too many times. And so the value in my life is not actually sitting back and listening, it's doing. So what David says is, hey, let me hear in the morning of your steadfast love. The first thing I want to know, God, is that you love me. And I think it's important for us as parents to realize this, that as much as you may love your kid, God loves your kid more. As much as you love your kid or you're crazy about your kids, like God loves them more. He has more affection to your kids than we could ever have. But how many times do we actually tell them that? Or do we actually honestly live up to that? So David says the first thing in the morning I need to remember is the steadfast love of God. That is to say, before he starts stepping out, before he strategizes about his next move, before he decides anything, there's one thing above all other things that he has to know. And I would say this. There's one thing that you have to know, whether you're a parent or not. The way that you can set your day up, the way that we can move and trust God the way I think we want to is this. You need to know that God is for you, God will help you, and God loves you. Because so many of us work from a perspective of trying to earn those things, and we just need to wake up in the morning before we've done anything to earn anything and know that God is for us, God will help me, and He loves me. Because David needed to know, to be reminded that God is faithful, that He keeps His promises, that He is good, and so do we as parents. We need to know that God says what He says about us, and it is Him we trust, that we're banking on Him, and He says, I love you. So how often are our prayers like this? God, I love my kids so much, but I know you love them more, so would you protect them? Would you lead them? Would you use my failures as a parent to show them how much you love them? And then David goes on and talks and just kind of repeats, but in a different way, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. He says, make me know the way I should go, for to you I lift up my soul. So if we trust in the Lord with all of our heart, He'll make our path straight. Like there's this path that He has for us, but David's perspective is, hey, would you make me know that? Would you let me know that? Because today's going to have its own challenges, and I'm going to face my own things. I'm going to feel like an awful parent. I'm going to feel like I'm ruining them. And that every decision I make is going to break them at some point. And I think we have to realize this, that we are not strong enough or powerful enough to fully mess up our kids. Now, do our decisions affect our kids? Yes, they do. But in the long run, God is faithful. In the moments when we are not, when the moments we hold on and we try to grasp and we try to protect them and we can't, God is faithful. So what would it look like for us to parent out of faith instead of fear? What if the very things we fear for our children and try to meticulously control turn out to be the avenues that God will use to open up their eyes to Him? What if God uses the hardest of days to grow their character and set them on a different yet eternally rewarding path than we would have chosen for them? Is my highest hope that my kid would go to a good college, get a good job, that he'll behave well in preschool, that he won't bite a kid, that he won't wet his pants, or that he'll have nice friends in his adolescence? Or is my highest hope that he'll marry someone that I approve of? Or is our highest hope that he will belong fully to God forever? I think that's what we got to work through. And then we have to ask ourselves, if it is that we want them to know God, to love Him, and to live for Him, then maybe we need to start changing the way that we wake up every morning. Just simply that. What would happen if we changed the way that we woke up and we set our alarm clock 5 to 10 minutes earlier and we just woke up and for 10 minutes we just listened? And we said, God, would you remind me of your love for me? Would you remind me that you love my kids more than I do? And God, would I trust you with them? I love, and it's so simple, but I love our City Kids line for this week. You can trust God no matter what. Parents, you can trust God no matter what. Whoever you are, wherever you're at, whatever stage of life you're in, you can trust God no matter what. One of the ways that we're going to do that in about 4 or 5 weeks is on September 29th, we're going to do something we're calling a child dedication. Like, if you want to know like a step is in that direction, what that could look like for you is to stand up in front of just a family of people on a Sunday morning and say, I'm going to commit to doing this. I'm going to commit to parenting my kid out of faith instead of fear. And what that looks like, and I know maybe if you've grown up in church, like sometimes that looks like baby dedication, but we just realize this, that we're a church that is for everyone. And what that means is we don't approve of everyone's choices or decisions, but we believe God is for you, so we want to be for you. And for some of us, just reality is you didn't grow up in church. And so you've got like a middle schooler, and you're like, well, can I dedicate them? Yep, you can. A high schooler, can I dedicate? Yep, you can. It's not a baby dedication. I've got a third grader. Is it okay? Like, it's a little embarrassing. No one here is going to judge you for standing in front of everyone and saying, I mean, the past is in the past, but as for me now, I'm going to point my kid to Jesus the best way I know how. In the moments I mess up, I need for you to help me in that. I need for you a community of people to surround me. That's what child dedication is. And so if you missed out when they were a baby, that's okay. If you have a baby that you want to dedicate, that's cool too. We're just saying it's kind of wide open. So we could have high schoolers, middle schoolers, elementary. It doesn't matter. There's going to be a form that we'll send out, and you can sign up, and we'll start talking and walking through that process. But that's going to be in September because we just believe it's that important. It's a moment. It's a milestone for you. It's a stake in the ground that says, I'm going to do my best to point my kids to God, and I'm going to trust God with them, whatever that looks like. Let's pray.